folks, welcome back to another Besides the Norm podcast. We're continuing our politics podcast for this month with Linda Holt from the Alliance for Unity.
Or All for Unity.
Is it All for Unity?
Well,
it's All for Unity.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think some of the social media marketing is Alliance still, but I guess couldn't get Alliance.
Well, no, the party name is All for Unity, and All for Unity will be on the ballot. The confusion came because it was first set up as Alliance for Unity, but the Electoral Commission, we had sort of terrible palaver with them, and they objected to the word Alliance, so it was changed to All for Unity. But I think the website, there is, as you say, there's stuff on the internet which still says Alliance for Unity, but the name of the party is All for Unity, but it is an alliance.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know Action for Independence had a similar issue, sort of same idea but opposite ends of the argument. And they initially tried Alliance as well and then had to change it to Action. So, yeah, similar things, but just different ends of the spectrum, I guess.
That's fine. So, I was wondering if you'd be able to introduce yourself for some of the viewers, if that's okay.
Sorry, introduce myself for who?
For some of the listeners.
Oh, the listeners, right. Sorry, I didn't hear that last bit. Yeah, well, my name is Linda Holt. I live in Fife in the Eastern Uke, where I'm a councillor. I've been a councillor since 2017. I'm 58, and I'm standing for All for Unity on the Mid-Scotland and Fife list. Mm-hmm. I don't know what else you want to know about me.
No, that's fine.
You can hear that I wasn't born in Scotland. I moved to Scotland 19 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So where about were you born and stuff like that? Like,
I was actually born in London, but I grew up and went to school in Jersey and the Channel Islands, which I basically left to go to university, and I never went back.
Right.
So was your plan always to sort of be in some sort of political position?
No, not at all. I wish it had been my plan, because I think actually I have always been really political. But I came from a family that, listened to the news and debated politics all the time, but not from a family. I mean, my family, my parents, my father left school at 12. My mother's education was completely disrupted. I was the first person in the family to go to university. So there wasn't really, and I didn't know any politicians growing up. It didn't seem like a kind of career choice. Mm-hmm. But I've always been very sort of politically interested and involved in what's going on around me. And I was very political at university. And I should have, but I thought I was also very academic, and I went down the academic route. But looking back, I think if I had, known people who were politicians or been in that milieu, I would have absolutely gone into politics straight after university.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that, I think you mentioned a wee bit of that come from your family as well. Were your family quite highly political as well?
Well, no, they listened to the news, and they listened. They had Radio 4 on all the time. They read newspapers, and my father talked about politics. I was violently opposed to my father's politics, I have to say. At university, I was sort of involved in far left politics and in separatist feminism. So, I have been across the political spectrum in my life.
Right.
Yeah, we had a similar thing with a candidate yesterday where his dad was a Conservative, and he's SNP now. So they've always had that sort of similar. Again, it's the same thing but a different end of the spectrum. Yeah. But it tends to be more common now.
Well, I mean, I'm not. I mean, I'm not part of the far left anymore, and I'm not a separatist feminist either. Any separatist feminist. I mean, that was what was trendy when I was at university, and anymore. But I mean, I've got kind of quite heterodox, quite mixed political views. It's quite difficult to put me in a particular political camp. When I stood for Fife Council, I stood as a Conservative, mainly because I was a unionist, and I was also very heavily involved in anti-wind farm campaigning in Scotland, and I helped set up a national grassroots campaign, which was also a lobbying campaign, and had quite a lot of contact with ministers and also councils and planning and so on. But the contact with Holyrood, I got to know Conservatives, and I got to know a lot about energy policy. Right. And I just, it just so happened that the MSPs I met who were Conservatives, I had a higher opinion of, and they had a much better energy policy than the other parties. And so when I decided I was going to stand for the council, which came directly out of the anti-wind farm work, and especially with planning, because I was so appalled at what I saw happening on planning committees in councils, where quite often the councillors hadn't even read the papers. They didn't know they literally didn't know what they were talking about. And I thought, well, I can do a better job for standing up for my community if I'm on the council. And that's what led me to go onto the council. It wasn't, and what led me to stand as a Conservative. But in lots of ways, I wasn't a natural Conservative. And I think quite a lot of my friends were quite shocked. And I did end up having a major falling out with the Conservatives, really at every level, both locally in my group, which was, there were a lot of problems, but also nationally with what I saw the Conservatives doing. And so I was, quite out of sympathy with them in Scotland. And I left the Conservatives in November 2019.
Okay. So
I then carried on as an independent, which I still am. Well, except now I'm with All for Unity, which suits me because it's a kind of, we've got people in the party who range from like George Galloway, who are still on the old-fashioned far left, to people who are, certainly a lot more right-wing than I am, and libertarian. I mean, I've got libertarian tendencies too, certainly. But, it's a broad, and there are people who are standing for Holyrood who've never been in a political party and who'd find it hard to say exactly where they ideologically align. So, I mean, we're all unionists. We all want there to be a proper unionist coalition government at Holyrood and to get the SNP out, because we see that we've had 14 years of misgovernment. And we can talk about more of that later. But I mean, that's really what we've got in common. And that suits me to actually be with a sort of bunch of people with quite differing views.
Yeah, so I've been watching quite a few of the Fife Council meetings, and I've noticed that you tend to not hold back when someone doesn't answer a question, which I appreciate.
I love that shit.
Yeah.
Well, they never answer the questions. I mean, they never answer the questions. No, I just boil over, really. But they never. It's very annoying. They never. I mean, it's a kind of mini, kind of worse version of Holyrood, really, at Fife Council. Mm-hmm. And they've got their written answers and they bypass the questions. And you're only allowed very limited opportunities for talking. You don't get a lot of comeback. So it's quite difficult. And an issue in Fife that I feel really strongly about, and I'm closely involved with the campaign group, is Mossmoran. And I've got 5 councils to pass various motions on Mossmoran, which is fantastic. But, the rules are that I'm not even allowed to be in the room when Mossmoran is debated, because I'm deemed to have an interest because I'm on the board of the Mossmoran Action Group, which is completely crazy. I'm the one person in the room who knows the most about the issue and who's worked on it for 4 years, or longer than 4 years, and I'm not allowed to speak. So it's quite, I mean, I'm allowed to raise it in questions, but not, we've had 2 motions. I've had to get other people to propose the motions and speak for them. And, and it is to Fife Council's credit that they've been upheld. But, it is quite limited in the council what I'm allowed to say and what I can do. And that's frustrating, although I think my political adversaries on the council are very pleased that I don't have any more opportunity to speak.
Yeah, I noticed. I found myself sort of like a meerkat every time I heard Linda Holt, do you have any supplementary questions? Instantly, I looked around and was like, oh, okay, here we go. This is going to be fun.
It's one of the things that's annoyed me throughout the years of watching politicians, and the ability to not answer a question is high on my biggest pet hates.
While also being arrogant enough to pretend that they've just ruined you.
They'll come out with some answer, and they'll sort of vaguely sort of dart around and dance around the question that's been asked, and I'm just just answer the fucking question. What? And it's usually because they don't have an answer a lot of the time.
Absolutely, no, I totally. Well, also, they tell lies, and that's very irritating as well. And you can't really catch them out on it. And then if you ask a question about something, yes, they agree with you that it's a great problem, but of course they're doing everything they can to address it. And they go on about the problem, but we all know the problem exists. We want to know what the politician is doing. The other thing that, and that now happens at Fife Council, especially with me, is that they will attack you. They won't talk about the subject. They get personal and they just attack the person, that, oh, you're a Tory, therefore you support austerity, or you're allied. They said in the last Fife Council meeting, All for Unity education spokesman, where's your education policy? That is completely irrelevant to my question and to my role as a councillor. But, they try to always politicise the answer, so that it just becomes a kind of football match rather than, as you say, answering the question. And it's a game, and I answer questions. I have a tendency, because I'm quite direct, to answer questions directly, which if I did get elected, I imagine I will have to learn not to do.
Yeah, this is my issue, because we've interviewed multiple politicians now. So we've been trying to do this every election since 2016. So we've interviewed quite a few politicians, and I decided to try and stand in 2017 just to see the process of how being a candidate works, and just so that I can't criticise somebody and then figure out, oh, I couldn't do that, so I've no reason to criticise. So I'd done it just to see what it was like. And I was worried that my brutal honesty was going to be a downside in politics. But thankfully it wasn't a big party, so there was never any worry that I was going to get in. But it was just that thing of assuming because you're in politics that you're going to need to lie just because everybody else does. Yep. It's kind of toxic.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's also very toxic to never take responsibility for anything.
Yeah.
That even though, you might have been in power for 5 years or 14 years or whatever, somehow it's always someone else's fault. And you never, and I know Nicola Sturgeon has now sort of perfected a strategy where she's apologising all the time, but it's not a real taking of responsibility at all. And there's all this stuff about lessons to be learned, but I don't see that. And it seems to be a sort of rule of politics that you can't say, yes, we messed up, or we absolutely haven't done it well enough. Yeah. And we really, I find that very annoying that nobody can admit that, really.
Yeah. This may be a stupid question. You might know the answer already, Craig. But since you're a councillor right now, if you get through and get this job now from this election, do you have to stop being a councillor, or do you continue doing that? And then... No,
I don't have to stop being a councillor. Okay. I don't have to stop being a councillor, and I wouldn't stop being a councillor because it would just be 1 year before the council elections, because they're in May 2022. Right. So I'd carry on, and I've got no doubt that I could still do everything that I need to do as a councillor. I mean, you're supposed to be able to be a councillor and hold down a full-time job, which is quite hard, and which you can only really do if you know the job backwards and you've got support from colleagues. But because I am an independent, I don't sit on very many in the council. I don't sit on many committees. I'm not allowed to because the committee places are apportioned according to how many councillors each party has got. So I don't have as much work in the council as some other people. I mean, I have a lot of local constituency ward work, but I would just amalgamate that with my, work as an MSP. So that would be completely doable, I think. And a lot of my meetings that I have to do locally are in the evenings, so I would carry on doing. I mean, I'd feel too awful to leave my ward in the lurch for a year. So, and because it takes quite a long time to learn the ropes as a councillor, to get to know the people and how to resolve issues and who to talk to at the council about things. It's not something somebody coming in new could master in a year. So I think I think the time to go, if I was elected as an MSP from the council, would be in May 2022 to stand down at that election.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine.
So we interviewed a lists member from AFI yesterday, which is sort of your polar opposite. But I imagine there's a lot of similarities in the fact that you're very focused on the one thing. They're focused on independence. You're focused on not independence. But apart from that, do you have policies out with that?
Yeah, we are just about to publish a manifesto. We've got broad policies, and then we've got sort of detailed policies. But when you say we're focused on not independence, the reason we're focused on not independence, isn't just because we think the union's a good thing. We think that the focus on independence for the last 14 years has meant that there's been a fatal lack of attention paid to actually dealing with problems in Scotland, and that every time the SNP addresses or has to deal with a problem in Scotland, it's fed through the prism of how will this play for getting support for the next independence referendum or increasing nationalist support. It's not, and we want to get rid of that thought so that we can actually just look at the problems in Scotland, say, okay, we're devolved, we've got this much money, we've got this much power to do something about these problems. How can we make the best of it? Because I don't think the SNP have been making the best of it. And worse than that, I think they've had a vested interest in not making the best of it. Actually, they don't want devolution to work, because if devolution works and it seems to do well in Scotland, I think there's a fear that people will say, well, we don't need independence, we're fine as we are. It's a little bit, I've been quite involved in Central Fife, and for years Labour was very dominant in Central Fife, and it carried on, it's former coal mining. I don't know if you're in Fife, former coal mining areas, multiple deprivation, huge amounts of problems for absolutely decades. And Labour kept on promising to fix these problems, and it never did. They carried on being really bad until at some point people started thinking in these areas, Labour wants us to stay poor and deprived and miserable and hating the Tories, so we carry on voting for Labour. And at some point they actually thought that, they'd had enough, and they switched. They no longer believe that, and they switched to the SNP. And I think the SNP are doing exactly the same with Scotland. They want Scotland to have all these, compare really badly in international tables when it comes to education, or it comes to health targets, comes to drug deaths, or it comes to housing, whatever you want to name, child poverty. Because then they're saying, oh, that's all because, we aren't independent. If we only had the full levers of power and, the magical day when independence comes and we're all rich, everything would be fine. And, I think that's a con. I think it's a con. And I think they haven't really put their energy, as I say, into making devolution work. And the people in All for Unity would park the whole debate about independence to one side. We wouldn't be, everything we do politically wouldn't be with either trying to make a case for independence, or as the Conservatives and Labour, they're always stuck with their policies because they have to agree with Westminster. Otherwise, everybody talks about a split, and then they get distracted into defending, what the government is doing in Westminster, and that's all anybody wants to talk about in Hollywood. And that's an idiotic distraction, because what we need to do is the best for Scotland. So there's a sense in which the people in All for Unity, I think the true nationalists, they're saying, Scotland's in a mess. We want to get on and sort this mess out. Now, I'm not a nationalist. I think for various reasons that Scotland's better off in the Union. My husband wasn't. He voted yes in 2014, and he does still sort of believe in Scottish independence, but not. He's so disillusioned with the SNP, he won't go near them. And I think, let's give devolution a chance. If in 10 years or 20 years, it's clear to me from being in government that actually, or from seeing a government that does the best it can by devolution, that actually Scotland really needs all these powers and would be better off, and is being kept down and oppressed by England, I will be the first one calling for independence. But I haven't seen that argument made. And so that's really, so to say that Alliance for Unity or All for Unity is just anti-independence is kind of wrong. What it is, it's pro-Scotland. And it wants a strong Scotland, that's forward-looking and doing creative things and doing its own thing and got the confidence to do that and have all its energy focused on that. Sorry, I'm ranting away now. I've got to shut up. Go on. Sorry.
Some other candidates don't speak enough.
Yeah.
So we'd prefer too much to not enough.
This is the whole idea of this show. One of the biggest... I'm going to ask you, actually, since you are a councillor... one of the things that I asked the Liberal Democrat candidate, Jane Ann Liston, there's a difference between sort of going into radio shows and hustings and stuff where you're given just a few minutes of time on the radio and stuff like that, and compared to this, where you're allowed to sort of talk about what, we're going into your backstory and you're allowed to have we're having a long form conversation, which I feel like a lot of local candidates don't get unless you're like big on the London scene. You get on like the bigger podcast down there and stuff like that.
Yep.
There's not those options up here. Do you feel like these are a better representation of politicians rather than the sort of quick radio shows and hustings?
Sound bites and stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, the sound bites are awful, and half the time sound bites, or nearly all the time, sound bites are written to the politicians by spin doctors.
That's a good point, yeah.
You know, I mean, and if the politicians go off script, they're accused of, you know, making a gaffe and of saying things that can be taken the wrong way, and then they get into terrible trouble. I mean, I think the whole kind of thing with what politicians say on the radio, and half the time, what they say in Hollywood, that's all written, that's all scripted.
Yeah.
There's very little of them being genuinely themselves.
One of my favourite videos to see was, I think it was David Cameron, and they showed the same interview. I think it was a 25-minute interview on the news, and they sort of split the clips into, because the interviewer asked like 3 or 4 different questions based around sort of the same premise a lot of the time, but David Cameron had exactly the same answer every single question, and you could see the written down answer that he had been given was just sort of switched back and forward, and different sentences were switched, but it was always the exact same answer. That was filthy to watch. I hated that.
Well, I mean, I actually wonder how some of these politicians can do that if they've got half a brain.
Yeah.
Because I would hate. I mean, I don't suppose that if I am elected, I will be in any kind of position of importance where anybody much cares what I say, really, or where we have spin doctors. But I mean, if I was that senior, you know, a leader, and I had everything written down to me, I would feel so constricted and so controlled. I don't think I could stand it. And I would also just feel so stupid, you know, saying these things that are obviously daft, that don't answer the question, that, you know, possibly even tell lies. I find it really quite difficult to understand how because to get to these high positions in the party, and you have to have a brain, you know, so you can't. So I don't actually understand how the people square it to do this. You know, how David Cameron squared it with himself, because he's not a stupid man or uneducated man.
Yeah. Have you seen it?
But you know, I suppose you.
Sorry, on you go.
You play the game. But.
Yeah. I was going to ask, have you seen the BBC programme The Thick of It?
I've never really watched that.
Oh, okay.
I'm really sorry. I don't watch very much television.
That's fine.
I recently binge watched the West Wing, which I'd never watched when it came out, and that was rather wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's the Thick of It is it's basically it's about I think the original idea was it was about the Tories and the Labour Party at the beginning. They don't mention what parties they're talking about, but they do make it very clear that they're two opposing parties. But there's loads of like sort of really great swearing in it and stuff like that, and it really goes in depth on like what spin doctors actually do on like the inside, and it's really, really great to watch.
Apparently, according to the politicians, it's very accurate as well.
So it's a treat I've got to look forward to. So I need to catch up with that. But it's supposed to be funny, because I'm not very good with things that's supposed to be funny.
Well, this is like.
But I'll have a go.
Yeah, I think you'll like this because it's
apparently based on what was his name, the spin doctor for Tony Blair.
Alistair Campbell.
Alistair Campbell, that's his name. And it's meant to be based on him because apparently he was very aggressive and sweary and very insulting when he was working in Number 10. So apparently the main character is meant to be based on what he was like in Number 10.
There's a lot of like really high class comedy in there as well, which you'll probably understand better than like I've tried to show this programme to some
non-political people.
Donuts. Some of my friends are donuts, right? So some of them don't understand a lot of the jokes. So you'll probably be fine in that sense.
Okay, so it might be a treat for me because I could do with something else to watch.
You'll love it. It's great.
Come back on and let us know how you got on with it. But yeah,
okay.
I was thinking that like this might be silly, but I think I would be more stressed if I had to remember the script for every answer because I'm quite an opinionated person to my detriment, I guess. Sometimes, but if I had to remember something that I don't really believe, I would be stressed about messing that up as opposed to just answering the question with what I believe. Because I'm much more calm with just saying things that I believe than making up or remembering scripts. I don't know why that's seen as more efficient. I think that would be more inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not.
Well, I think it's about control. But parties like to control people and control the message. I think the Conservatives never liked me much because I wasn't under control. And and if they have people who are happy to stick to the script, then they've got that control. And one of the things I like about All for Unity is that we won't, we haven't got any, strong central control at all. Yeah. As I say, it's a very broad sort of ideological alliance, and anybody who's elected will effectively sit as an independent. Although we belong to All for Unity, we won't have a whip, so we won't have to vote in a certain way. We'll be allowed to make up our own minds. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that might make for a certain amount of anarchy, but it will, and maybe a lot of rows, but it will mean that, all of us are conviction politicians who, speak our minds and according to our principles, not because some whip has told us what to say.
Yeah. So you said you had some policies in All for Unity. How does that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's standing up. I suppose I should get it'll be published in the next few days, the manifesto. Yeah. One of the things that we do want is what Jamie Blackett, the leader, calls, and he's written about a Clarity Act, which would kind of look at devolution and clout, because there's uncertainty still about what bits in the devolved settlement are for the Scottish Parliament and what bits are for Westminster. And there's been a lot of, as far as from what I can see, is encroachment by the SNP in order to advance the nationalist argument into areas that are properly Westminster areas, like stuff to do with foreign policy, international aid, having sort of mini kind of pretend embassies abroad. All of that I don't think should happen, and I think that needs to be discussed and clarified. Foreign policy is reserved, and we come under. I'm really sorry, I've got my phone's gone off. Hang on.
Okay. Sorry.
I just hung up on whoever it was. So that's one, and the Clarity Act would also, because one of the reasons that we have this constant agitating around a second independence referendum is that we don't have any clear terms like they have in Canada about under what circumstances another independence referendum could be held and what that independence referendum could look like. And we'd like to see an act part of this Clarity Act specifying that, yes, after a certain amount of time, or if there's this much support in the country for an independence referendum, then yes, one is held. And this is the way that the questions go, and this is the threshold for the voting, so that everyone knows where they are. Because at the moment, every little tiny detail is up for debate, and every, and goalposts move, the SNP moves the goalposts constantly in order to maximise the argument for a second independence referendum. And we'd want to kind of draw a line under that, as I say, by clarifying that. So that's one of the sort of big policy things. We'd also repeal the hate crime bill. We don't, we're quite strongly behind freedom of speech. We also think that women should have been protected. That should have been a characteristic that was recognised in the bill. I'm struggling now to think. I mean, we've got an idea. It was an idea that Jamie Blackett had, that actually to call the First Minister, not the First Minister, but the First Servant, because we think that politicians are absolutely the servants of the people, and that, they are always in danger of forgetting that. So we'd also like the Scottish Government to go back to being called the Scottish Executive, because it isn't. Because the reason that obviously Alex Salmond wanted to call it the Scottish Government was to elevate its status so that it is equal to Westminster. It isn't equal to Westminster. We come under the UK government. Yes, there's bits that we do in Scotland that are our own thing and that we're fully in charge of, but the overarching government is in Westminster, and we are an executive. So we would bring back the terms of executive and assembly. So it would be a sort of, I suppose one would take away the sort of nationalist expansion which we think has, had a political purpose that we've seen in the last 14 years. But, we wouldn't give up any powers. In fact, we would be keen, the SNP haven't accepted powers, for example, over social security that they've been awarded, and we would certainly be very keen to use all of the powers that we do have to the utmost. So it's not that we would be giving powers away. It's a little bit more about the image. We'd also be saying that all government buildings, have to fly the Union Jack beside the saltire. I mean, these are kind of fluffy things, really. They're not really important policy things. I mean, but it's more of a kind of orientation away from constantly agitating nationalist agitation and using Parliament to do that. We would step away from that.
Yeah. So I asked that specifically because of your past in the Conservative Party, although you said you had a lot of disagreements, we'll say, with them. And then you got George Galloway, who's a socialist. And so I was wondering what kind of policies would have came from that. But it seems that what you're saying is...
Oh, right. Well, for me, I mean, I'm the education spokesperson. And for me, with education, one of the things I've got 3 children. One is at a state school at Madras in St Andrews, and one is at a private school in St Andrews. And my daughter, she actually went to private schools in England. So I've been involved with schools all my life in one way and another. And I am absolutely, I don't know how to put it. I am beyond upset and beyond angry at how the education system, state education system in Scotland, has let down children who come from, who live in deprived areas, who have problems, who may be autistic or have learning difficulties, or who are poor and who don't have middle class parents. Scottish education has stagnated or gone backwards in the last 14 years. It hasn't advanced. A lot of great things were said for the curriculum, for excellence, and although it's done some good things in primary schools, it's been a mess in secondary schools and it hasn't delivered. And the kids who have missed out, as I say, are the ones who've got the least good life chances to start with. They are the ones who've suffered the most. And it is, and that's where, if I had any involvement with education, that's where my focus would be. The fact that, it is much harder to go, or far fewer students from deprived backgrounds go to university in Scotland than in England, because of the fee structure that we've got overwhelmingly favours middle-class students. And that's why it was brought in, because it was a way of the SNP getting the sort of vote of middle Scotland, which they needed. They needed that support. But it's completely wrong, because it was on the backs of the chances of poor people. We've decimated further education in Scotland, which again is, what people with fewer chances in life need. So I think that I think the Conservatives have gone completely wrong to follow the SNP policy now in supporting free education. I think we need to have fees, whether that's paid for, I don't know, through loans like it is in England, or whether that's paid for through taxation. And we need to have far more university places in Scotland, because the fact is, the only way that the SNP can pay for free middle-class university education is to cap places for Scottish students in Scottish universities, which is an outrage, and is one of the things that stops, people from poorer backgrounds even getting into university in Scotland. And that needs sorting out quite strongly, as I say, and we need a lot more investment in further education. The cuts, we've had terrible cuts in schools of educational psychologists, support assistants, and teacher numbers. So if you have got additional support needs at school, unless you are, as a child, completely chaotic in class, so the teacher can't teach, it is very difficult to get any kind of assessment, because as soon as it is formally assessed, the school is then obliged to give you support, and they haven't got the support. And that's reflected in mental health services. If you've got an autistic child, I have got an autistic child. We've been waiting 3 years now for a diagnosis. It's as plain as day that she is this. I can get a private diagnosis tomorrow for £2,000. But we're still waiting. I mean, we know, but the reason that we can't get an official diagnosis is because the support in the schools and outside the schools simply isn't there, and that's how they ration treatment and how they massage the figures. Even though it's very hard to get yourself recognised as having additional learning needs or support needs in schools, the numbers have rocketed of pupils with these needs, whilst the numbers of teachers, specialist teachers to help these pupils has fallen year on year since the SNP has been in charge. And these children, they are just, they are abandoned. They are abandoned to the system. And I've seen, and it's got a lot worse through the online learning that we've had to do during COVID. And it really, it makes me want to weep. And my interest here, I mean, it's absolutely a sort of socialist one, because it is so unfair, and it bakes in. I mean, bakes in inequality from a very young age. I also am very strongly in support of going to school later. We go to school far too early. We need to go at 6 or 7 like European countries, and we need to spend a lot more on highly skilled nursery education.
That's something I don't hear very often, is people acknowledging the fact that we go to school so early, and so kids aren't allowed to be kids for very long, and then they're shoved into this environment where they've got learning to do, and you can learn at home.
And they're not ready. They're very, some children are ready to learn. My daughter, I think it was a mistake, but I sent my daughter to school at 4. She was the youngest in the class. She actually went to private school because no state school would take her. She was very advanced, but I think it was still wrong for her. I didn't send my son to school till he was 6, so he was nearly 7. And I just kept him home. And when he got to school, and in an outdoor nursery, and when he got to school, he was ahead of all the kids who'd done P1. Yeah. But that was because he'd learnt through playing outside with other children. He was socialised. He, also suited him because he had a lot of social anxiety. So it would have been quite traumatic for him to go to school young. But it was the absolutely right thing to do for him. And even for my daughter, as I say, who was quite advanced, and I was quite sure that she needed to go to school because she needed the stimulation. I mean, she was an only child, and she'd been hothoused by her parents. I think she could have got that stimulation by playing outside for a couple more years, actually, and she would have been in a better sort of psychological state for it. Children, the thing is, people think here that you have to start learning to read at 5. You don't. Yeah. If you start learning to read at 7, you learn so fast because you're ready, and everyone manages it, because very few manage it at 5. Yeah. So and they're just not ready to sit still. They want to move, and they need to learn. They need to learn socialisation. And a lot of kids come to school because they've been plonked in front of screens. They haven't had enough, and they haven't. And the parents are working all the time. They haven't had enough chance to do that, to learn that socialisation, which you learn through play. So I think the evidence for this is absolutely overwhelming, and the reason we haven't done it is that it's expensive. It's very expensive. Yeah. Because we have to have more years of nursery education, and we have to train our nursery teachers, the people who work in nurseries, to a much higher level than we have been doing if we're going to do this.
Yeah. So you were talking a bit about mental health treatment and stuff as well there. So in 2014, I asked for mental health treatment for depression and anxiety, and I'm still waiting to this day for that treatment of any sort of therapy or anything like that. Thankfully, I'm better now, but I mean, that's 7 years and I'm still waiting. So my assumption was that the reason that couldn't happen is because there's not enough therapy in this area. I stay in Kennoway, so I stay quite rural Fife.
All right.
And so that was my assumption. Is there things that could be done to improve that sort of process? Is it funding it needs,
totally
or is
agree.
it?
I mean, they always talk about making mental health equals physical health in terms of the priority it's given. I mean, that's a soundbite that politicians like coming out with, but they don't do it. And I know I totally agree with you about mental health. I mean, I think half of what GPs see, even when people turn up with physical ailments, are actually mental health problems. And it is awful. And the way that it's treated is basically you put people on such a long waiting list. They either get better on their own, as you did, or find ways to treat themselves because they're not getting any help, or they get so bad that they kind of die of something else, or turn up in hospital with a physical ailment. I mean, it is a complete disgrace. But the worst, and it's obviously very bad for adults, but the worst situation is with children, where they have, mental health waiting list is, I think, over a year for a child. But even to get onto the waiting list is very hard. I went to the doctor for one of my own children, and the doctor said, "Oh, go and talk to a teacher at school." And I said, "No, I want a referral." We didn't get it. And I think you have to fight incredibly hard to get any kind of treatment. And then, and again, that's wrong, because that favors basically, people who are middle class, who are good at asserting their rights. And also, if you need, or parents can do that, because sometimes, because they become like sort of lionesses for their children. Yeah. But I mean, if you yourself are suffering from a mental health problem, it's incredibly difficult to go to the doctor and say, "Look, I'm really this ill and I need this help and I must get it and you have to give it to me." It's just, you're too depressed to do that. You're too depressed to go to the doctor and assert yourself. It's really, I think we need a sort of revolution, really, in how we treat mental health. And what is good is I think there's less stigma now attached to it than there used to be when I was growing up. And it's possible to talk about it and to admit to mental health problems, but the treatment just isn't there. I mean, the vacancies for psychiatrists in Fife have been really, really high. I mean, and for child psychiatrists have been awful. So, that's the government thing, and it's about spending money and having the will to do it.
Nice ending. Have you got anything else to bring up, Stephen? Do you have any questions?
No. I was going to ask. Linda if she had anything specific she wanted to talk about before we went.
I didn't realise you were both in Fife. You both in Fife?
Yeah. We stay in the same house.
We're brothers.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. So you're in Kenaway. So that's why you've heard of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I actually asked. I messaged All for Unity on Facebook.
All right.
Asked them who was there, and I knew your name. I just didn't know you were all for Unity. Because I'm quite sad, and I watch all the Fife meetings and stuff. That's my life. And so I knew your name. I just didn't know you were in All for Unity.
Well, maybe you should think about standing for the council next year.
Well, I did in 2017, and
all right.
It's not some. I spoke to Kay Morrison.
Was it on Linda's part you were standing for as well?
No, it wasn't. No. It was she's East Nuke, so that was Gran's place.
Oh, Gran's place, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I spoke to Kay Morrison in 2016. She was deputy provost at the time, and she was telling me about the work as a councillor. And I've spoken to David Alexander multiple times, and Ryan Smart I've spoken to as well. And none of it seems like it's something I want to do for 5 years or 4 years or whatever it is. It just seems like a lot of stress and things that I wouldn't be able to cope with very well.
Phone's going off all the time that you can't deal with.
Yeah.
But that's me. Hang on, I'm just gonna hang up, even if someone else answers it in the house. I don't know. I never get this many phone calls. It's because we're doing this program.
Yeah.
No, well, The thing is, you have a lot of control as a councillor about what you do and whether you choose to do the stressful things. I mean, I have colleagues who have very little stress and who, it has to be said, do very little as well.
Yeah.
Or who maybe concentrate on, casework where they help people with their problems rather than fighting the council or doing stuff on committee. I mean, there's a vast amount. The work is never ending, really. It's how much you want to make of it, and it's incredibly various. And so you have and nobody tells you what to do, which is quite a nice thing. So you have a lot of freedom. Obviously, it's not a good thing if you're like me and you're quite perfectionist and you think you should do everything. And so I persecute myself in the job quite a lot. I mean, nobody persecutes me. I do it to myself. But it is incredibly interesting. No day is the same. And people who've been both, I mean, I remember Leslie Laird, who was an MP and a councillor simultaneously for a while, saying this, that actually the council work was a lot more satisfying than the work as an MP, because as a councillor, you could actually help people. You could make a difference to individual people's lives in a way that it was much harder to do as an MP. And that is a tremendous privilege, really. And really, you can think, gosh, there's nothing better I could have done this morning than help this person, sort out the damp in their council, get the council to listen about the damp problem, or get this village to get their new playground, or get this building saved, or whatever it is. And that's a great feeling, really. So, I mean, obviously you'd know best how you manage stress in your life, but I'm saying that it doesn't have to be stressful and overwhelming, and it can be very, very rewarding. I don't know.
One of our favourite things to see in the past, 5 years we've been doing this podcast?
7
years.
8 years. We started in 2015.
Totally different one. But there was one of our favourite things we've seen in the past 8 years of doing this podcast is the politician where is the camera thing, where they show up show up to an event, and there's a very specific person, we'll not mention any names, but they'll show up to an event and the first thing they'll ask is like, where's the camera guy? So they can just get in there just to show the people that he's been at this event, sort of thing. So I've already put it out there. But
would that be a Fife politician by any chance?
Yes, I might know who certainly is. Yeah.
All right, I think I know who you mean. In fact, he just shows up to things even when he's not invited, if he knows that the press are going to be there.
I'm highly interested in seeing if it's the right person.
Yeah, once we stop recording, we'll exchange names.
Well, I mean, that's another disadvantage I have as a politician, because I absolutely hate having my photo taken. I hate seeing my photo. It's just something I have to kind of just put up with, but I hate it.
That was another issue was during the campaign was having to be in photos, because the person that was on the campaign, there was only 2 candidates in Fife from this party, so the only other person in the campaign was really into being in photos and stuff like that, and he was very outward, is that a word? I don't know. He was very there. He was always there, and he was just
right. He was an extrovert, basically. Very
extroverted, and I'm very introverted, so that was hard to deal with as well.
Yeah. But there's lots. I mean, once you get elected, obviously you need to. If you want to be a councillor in Fife, you need to stand for a party that's likely to get elected.
Yeah.
But if you did, you'd find there's a lot of introverted councillors. They're not all. I mean, I'm actually, believe it or not, even though I talk such a lot, I'm quite shy and introverted and retiring, and I don't like being centre of attention. I don't want my photo everywhere. I find it really embarrassing that I'm supposed to put out leaflets. I hate talking about, because a lot of politicians are really good at taking credit for all kinds of things they haven't done. Well, I find it quite difficult to take credit even for things that I have done, because it just feels like, showing off.
Yeah.
And I just hate all of that. I mean, I talk such a lot because I get passionate about something and then I boil over, and that's what happens in Fife council meetings, and I want to get things done. But I don't want the attention on me. I want the attention on the problems or the solutions, or, the people who have made, because no politician does anything on their own. It's always working with other people, and it's working with, as a councillor, it's working with communities. And I want the attention on the communities who've made these amazing things happen. So it is quite it is. So you don't have to be like. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to be extrovert to be a councillor, and I hate that side of things.
Right, you've convinced me.
So
I'm joining Labour. I'm doing
well,
so.
no, if you need more convincing or help, don't get in touch with me outside of this. My husband actually stood as an independent in Lochgelly in 2017 in the council election. He got nowhere. There's no independents got in 2017.
Yeah, that's sad.
So it's very difficult. That's why I stood as Conservative, because I knew I wouldn't get in otherwise. If I don't get elected to Hollywood for Unity, I will stand again next summer, and I'll probably either stand as All for Unity or as an independent. It doesn't really make much difference.
Yeah.
It'll be a long shot, because it's very difficult to get in as an independent back into Fife Council.
I think even No Greens
that's what
won.
Suits me.
Is that right? Zero Greens
Sorry?
won as well.
No, zero Greens. No, we've got no Green councillors.
Yeah, normally at least a couple of Greens getting somewhere.
Have we had Green councillors before in Fife?
I think so. No.
Oh, really? I wasn't really. I don't remember. I'd be quite surprised, because they've really come up recently. So are you doing all the candidates across Scotland?
We've messaged all of them. The only people we haven't had confirmation from.
It's not all across Scotland, is it?
Not across Scotland. Across just mid Scotland and Fife.
Oh.
Yeah.
Every party we've.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
We've messaged.
Sorry, I thought you were doing the whole of Scotland.
No.
It's way too much work.
Yeah, that's way too much work. We've messaged every party to get at least one person, either a constituency candidate or a list candidate.
Yeah.
And everybody's got back to us, apart from Reform UK. Even the Communist Party got back in touch with us, and they've only got 3 candidates.
Should we know if
Sorry, the Communist Party's got a candidate?
Yeah, they've put up 3 candidates, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
You're much better informed than I am.
I don't know if it's constituency or list seats, but they have put up 3 candidates.
Gosh.
I don't know if it's in Fife.
As we're going through all these, because there's no policies being released, that there's no manifesto has been released or anything like that.
That's another issue, is we don't know.
So we're just having to go by the skin of our teeth.
So yeah, I should clarify. We are trying to get people in Fife, but we don't know if the Communists are standing in Fife. They've just said they've got 3 candidates.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess we are just messaging every party in Scotland, but we are trying to get Fife. I'll say that.
The All for Unity has got, I think we've got 1 space left on the list, which we're just confirming. But we've got a full slate of candidates. We will have a full slate of candidates for the list. Yeah. But I don't think the other names, apart from mine, have been released yet. So you could talk to more All for Unity people in Fife if you wanted.
Okay.
Right. Okay. There you go. Well, thanks for joining us, Linda. That's been much appreciated.
Okay, is that you've had enough? You've had enough?
Well, if we can keep you on for a few minutes after we stop recording, so we can.
Okay, no, I just wondered if there was anything else you wanted to ask me.
Oh no, we're okay. We're okay.
Yeah, if you've got a final push for why people should vote for you as opposed to anybody else.
Actually, we've done this with
Craig Dempsey.
Yeah, like a final 2-minute thing, like we said we hated.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! But you see, I should have prepared something. Why you should vote for me is because we've had 14 years of the SNP in government. We've had 14 years of things stagnating in Scotland or getting worse, and 14 years of agitation, because we've had 14 years of agitation around independence and a second independence referendum, and we want to change that. And we've had 14 years of actually quite feeble opposition as well, and All for Unity stands for unity, for not splitting the opposition to the SNP, for, if the All for Unity advice for tactical voting is taken to heart by voters. We did want the parties themselves, the main parties, to adopt a tactical voting strategy and stand down candidates in constituencies where they had no hope of winning in favour of the Unionist candidate most likely to beat the SNP, in order to maximise the number of Unionist MSPs, but they have all refused to do that. So now it's up to voters to do that themselves, and we know from the people who've contacted us and from polling that we've done, that increasing numbers of people are wanting to vote tactically to stop the SNP. They're fed up with Labour fighting the Conservatives instead of, getting, or the Lib Dems fighting the Conservatives. They should all come together so that they can form a group against the SNP and govern in a government of national unity. And if enough unionist MSPs are elected and all for unity MSPs are elected, then we will have a majority, and we can form a government that will really take Scotland forward and do its absolute best by devolution in Scotland. And that's why, that's what I'm committed to. I'm desperate for things to get better in Scotland. I don't see a way of that happening under the SNP. As I say, they've had 14 years. And this is the way forward. And that's the reason to vote for me, really.
There you go. I don't know if that was 2 minutes exactly.
I think that was a bit over 2 minutes, to be honest. We maybe need to cut some of that.
All right. I wouldn't be surprised, because I always go on. So, is that it then?
That's it. That's it. Thank you very much again. We're cool there. Perfect.
Yeah.